Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to be having a conversation today with Larry Fink, which we are pre-recording a few days ahead of BBVA's second Sustainability Forum. Larry needs no introduction. He's the founder, chairman and CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, with assets under management nearly 10 trillion. He's also been and continues to be a clear voice advocating for stakeholder capitalism and in particular sustainability in many ways through his much awaited annual letters that have a lot of impact. And he's also a good friend. So Larry, thank you for being with us. It's a real privilege to have you in this conversation about how we can get the world to decarbonize and moving from words to action. The need to decarbonize is very clear, Larry. We have seen the effects of the heat waves this summer. We have seen the fires, we have seen the droughts. We have also seen the floods that has made it palpable and manifest, although it's a long-term trend, which effects we have been seeing for a while, and we have to get our act together. At the same time, it's a formidable challenge to decarbonize. It will require a lot of investment and a lot of innovation. We need to develop new technologies to solve some of the unsolved problems, and then we need to mobilize trillions of dollars to deploy those technologies and some that already exist across our economies. At the same time, the world's facing unprecedented uncertainty and a difficult environment. One, I would say, that we haven't seen in decades, starting with the invasion of Ukraine, a humanitarian tragedy that also has exposed the risks of energy dependency and fossil fuel energy dependency, I should say. We have seen and we're experiencing high inflation in commodities, in energy. We're seeing the response of central banks, how this is going to be affecting growth, and inevitably this will be reflected in all of the decisions by all actors, governments, private parties as well, all investment decisions. So in this context, Larry, do you think that the short-term economic challenges that we're facing and the long-term decarbonization need to decarbonize, do you think we can tackle those together? Is there a risk of reverting to tried and proven fossil fuels? How do you see the tension?
A really difficult question, Carlos. Unquestionably, I am optimistic that we will find solutions. We do as humanity, no different than when we had a pandemic 3 years ago, and it took 8 months to come up with vaccinations that truly minimize the impact of the virus. We as humans have constantly found solutions, and over tens and tens of years, we have improved the quality of life. We're now being threatened because the major source of energy has been hydrocarbons, and the entire world is dependent on hydrocarbons. And to rid ourselves of hydrocarbons in 1 year is an impossibility. It's an impossibility over 10 years, probably over 20 years. It's still an impossibility. So we're going to have to be focused on long-term solutions. And the long-term solutions is to, in the short run, embrace some form of hydrocarbons like gas, which is obviously less pollutive than other forms of hydrocarbons. And then we have to mobilize, financial engines to find new solutions, new technologies, to create competitive technologies to the cost of hydrocarbons. Let's be clear, that is a daunting task, because even at $83 a barrel, where it is today, that is really cheap for what it creates in the output now, and so it is just going to take a time in which we are solving solutions. You're right the way you framed it. We're in a period of probably more uncertainty, economic certainty, political uncertainty that I've seen in maybe my professional career. Any energy transition has to be fair and just. And when energy prices accelerate upward because of We have been mitigating supply without mitigating demand. At the same time, we now have the imbalances because of the Russian-Ukraine war and Russia's behavior related to gas in Europe, and then obviously selling oil at discounted to other countries like India and China. So we're in this transitional phase right now that is really impacting the variability of where energy prices are. But I'm crystal clear more than ever that through technology, we're going to bring down the green premium. And we are doing that. I mean, if you just think about Spain for a minute, has been a leader in solar for years and years, and also in wind. And more of the power grid in Spain is being powered by renewables. Renewables, like wind and solar, is competitive to almost any hydrocarbon. The problem of it is it's intermittent. It is not, you don't have a consistent supply. And so to do this, we're going to have to create better battery technology, which has its own issues and own risks because it requires some very rare metals that are only in a few places in the world. It is manufactured mostly in China, which has its own issues, having that type of dependency. And so the key is going to be gas. And I'm very pleased that the Eurozone finally has said gas is green. And you could argue, was that a knee-jerk reaction to the problems of what's going on between Europe and Russia? Sure. We have always believed that gas is going to be the hydrocarbon that is the main source during this transition. And for instance, having gas as a backup to sun and wind is a good long-term strategy. At the same time, building gas pipelines are going to be urgently needed. BlackRock has been one of the leaders in financing gas pipelines, whether it was in Saudi Arabia recently or Abu Dhabi or from Texas to Mexico City. We're a big believer in having the consistency of pipelines, at the same time LNG plants. And so what we're going to need to do in this transition, and this is going to be critical for Europe, for the UK, for the United States, we have to find ways to reduce the timing of permitting. We're working on a couple projects here in the United States related to, gas, and the permitting process may be 7 to 8 years. And so there lies the fundamental costs of doing this and all the other issues. We're going to have to invest in hydrogen. Hydrogen will be a major component of renewables. Hydrogen is going to be, in our opinion, the source of energy for large engines, for large machinery. And so we're going to have to be utilizing all these different elements. And in many cases, we do have a lot of the science, but it's just more costly. And it's going to take time to create more efficiencies and better science. So yes, in the short run, we're going to have probably more utilization of coal and so in the short run, yes, but I don't believe that's changing our future. I think it's going, our future, we know that we have to move forward, but we have to move forward to making sure we don't have the economic disruptions that so many Europeans are facing, so many Americans are facing. Look at the inflation in the UK today. It is because the energy side, especially heating and gas, is so extraordinarily high because of the imbalances. These are all transitory. This will work itself out. I am pleased in Germany that they've rapidly changed the permitting process. They're building LNG plants right now, and I'm told historically they take 2+ years. They're going to do it less than 1 year. And so, we're seeing this change. We're seeing this urgent change. So I would just tell everybody, decarbonization technology is the future. The opportunity to invest in decarbonized technology is very large. At the same time, we cannot abandon tomorrow hydrocarbons. And so this is why it requires this balance between utilization of hydrocarbons, moving towards decarbonization. Now, if we wanted to create a very unjust world, we could eliminate hydrocarbons tomorrow and create a recession that is very large, and then we could rapidly try to change to a more decarbonized technology. I personally don't believe that works. It's not fair and just, and it will leave, emerging markets behind. They can't afford that. They can't even afford what's going on now. And so all of these issues are very severe. But I am confident, more than ever before, that we're going to solve these solutions. I would just tell you, our clients are clamoring to find great investments in decarbonized technologies. And let's be clear, this is working with the hydrocarbon companies, not against them. And this is one thing that I think is really critical. I believe the major energy companies of the world today are going to be the leaders in sequestration of carbon. They own all these big reserves, these big wells. Some of them have been very much depleted. These caverns are going to be great areas where we are going to, sequester that carbon. And so to only get to a decarbonized future, it is not just creating new technologies as an alternative to hydrocarbons. But at the same time, we're going to have to find mechanisms to sequester, to capture the carbon. And so all of this just requires a lot of long-term planning, and it's a balancing act. We have to set an objective. How much do we expect energy prices to go up, or how can we have them go down, and still move forward in a structured way for decarbonization? The urgency is real, as you framed it. Almost every part of the world is experiencing record heat, droughts, crop destruction. At the same time, we're seeing evidence when there's storms. They're not insignificant storms. They're very large storms, whether they're from hurricanes and cyclones. And when it rains, it's not a modest rain. They're large amounts of rain. I mean, example, even in New York, we've had about a 60-day drought. And yesterday in the suburbs of New York, it actually rained the equivalent of 7 inches, or in one day. And so that's uncommon to have that type of rain. And so it's just an example. We're seeing extremes in heat, extremes in rain. We're seeing, and this is one thing that's going to be really bad for crops. We're seeing, because of the elevated heat and the early moment of heat, we don't even have the pollinators. The pollinators are not even there yet. And so, because when you have early heat, let's say in late winter, early spring, the pollinators are not there. The crops are going earlier than they used to. Now we have the droughts and all that. So everything is changing. And I wrote about in my CEO letter about climate risk as investment risk. We're seeing evidence of that everywhere. And we all have to be prepared how to mitigate this and how to manage forward. And so as somebody who believes that we have to move rapidly for decarbonization, I also believe we have to be working with the energy companies of today, not against them. I actually believe we have to work with governments to find solutions. That is not the abandonment of hydrocarbons. It is structuring a process in which we build up more and more decarbonization technologies. We create new technologies for sequestration. At the same time, we're working with these hydrocarbon companies.
Very clear, Larry. Very clear that this is a transition. It takes time, but it's as important as ever. Also, you commented on the big role of government, energy companies. Moving now to what this means for businesses. At the forum, we're going to host 2 panels in which precisely representatives, executives of different businesses are going to be talking about their own plans and how decarbonization affects them. What does it mean to compete in a net zero world? I believe that this affects every company in every sector, and it's one of the most relevant, if not the most relevant strategic issue long-term for any business. Certainly at BBVA, we have long ago identified sustainability as a strategic priority, not only adjusting and ensuring that our activity meets the Paris Agreement standards and signatories of net zero, etc. But actually having impact with our clients. So advising and financing, mobilizing capital to ensure that they adjust and that they manage this risk first and foremost, and then actually that they capture the opportunity. So the question from my side on this would be, how should businesses be preparing? How should they be preparing for, and how should they be participating in the net zero transition? What does it mean from an investor perspective for the companies that you invest in? And what are the challenges and opportunities for investors as the transition unfolds?
Well, we start with the premise that climate risk is investment risk. And so we start with that foundational belief. We also start with a foundational belief that the transition is not going to be happening in 2 years or 5 years. It's a 20, 30-year process. And so what we are asking companies to inform us, how are you moving forward? And that doesn't mean any abandonment, of hydrocarbons. It means using them, but also moving forward. And how are you going? What is your process of moving forward? And so it's a very delicate balance. I would say probably one of my more emotional issues, we need to have governments not just asking public companies to move forward, but all of society. What we're seeing in the EU, and we're starting to, we're seeing this in the proposal from the SEC, that they're asking public companies about how they're moving forward, but no one's asking, the private sector. And so we're seeing a arbitrage. Public companies were selling hydrocarbons to private companies, did not change the world's net zero at all. It just moved it from something that's transparent to now something that is opaque. And so for every company, we have to, find solutions. But the last thing I want to know, I want is having this wicked arbitrage between public companies who are being forced to make the changes and private companies are not. And so governments have to be consistent. If we're going to move forward together, we have to ask all businesses to move forward together. And this is about not the mitigation of supply. And so much of this was the question about what are we doing about supply of hydrocarbons. We have to have this more comprehensive. So when we have conversations with any business worldwide, we want to be informed how you're moving forward, but it's not for us to tell them what to do. They have to tell us how they're moving forward. And if it's a justifiable plan, they were very supportive of it. And we're typically very supportive of the plans that we meet with chemical companies and across the board. But let's be clear, it is our view that technology is going to bring down the cost of decarbonization. And so every company is going to have to participate in this. And the more important is, as you mentioned in the first question about stakeholder capitalism, from BlackRock's perspective, from our own employees, our employees are asking us more and more, what are we doing? And now a lot of our clients are asking us what we are doing. Now, some clients are saying you're doing too much, okay? And that's how we have to navigate this, what we call stakeholder capitalism. But I do believe employees in most companies are very urgently asking the leadership to say, what are we doing? How are we moving forward? And importantly, as we all know, in this labor shortage world that we're living in right now, you want your employees to feel connected, and the more connected your employees feel, the more they work with you in the company and help build the company together. And so I would say what every business has to do, they have to judge all their stakeholders, and their stakeholders are going to tell them how to move forward. And I believe that is going to be the key element. Whether, if you want the top talent from our perspective, your talent is asking you to move forward. If you want to be connected globally, your clients are asking you to move forward too. So, Carlos, we at BlackRock, we don't have to be that demonstrative anymore. We're not demanding or telling anybody. We're just asking for information. How are you moving forward? And what we're seeing, a very large change over the last 2 years with most public companies, is because there's other stakeholders, their employees, and their clients are asking them to move forward. And so I'm pretty proud of how capitalism has been moving forward in this. Now, some environmentalists will say we're not moving fast enough, and they may be right, but at the same time, any transition to work is going to have to be fair and just, that all the society is being lifted by it, not some segments that are being lifted and other segments that are being oppressed. And so these are the hard issues that we as large businesses have to face.
On a related note, but moving on to a slightly different topic, according to the World Outlook, Energy Outlook by the IEA, investment in clean technology has been growing nicely at a 10-12% clip over the last couple of years. I think it's going to be 8% in 2022 in developed markets. Now, if we look at the investment in clean technologies in emerging markets, if we exclude China, it's still stuck at the levels of 2015. So what I see is that emerging markets, which are very relevant in particular for us, but for the world as well, are lagging behind, and they're essential. If we are to decarbonize, it's one planet. They need to develop, and they need to do so in a clean way. And now, in my mind, it should be top of the agenda for these countries to decarbonize, given that they're more exposed, given that there's a lot of potential to invest in nature-based solutions, for example, to capture CO2 that you were mentioning earlier. And also because they don't have the legacy, so they can leapfrog. And as they develop, they can apply and deploy immediately the solutions that already are competitive. But instead of that, what we see in many of the countries where we're present, that they're lagging behind. So I would like to ask you what needs to happen for this to change. What needs to happen to mobilize capital to emerging economies? What needs to be done to bridge the gap in order for the planet to develop and decarbonize at the same time?
Well, first of all, I would say the emerging world is a very fragmented world today, and it's getting more fragmented. There are going to be some big winners and some big losers. But overall, I'm very worried about the future decarbonization in the emerging world. You framed the question of talking about the investments are stagnant. I don't see how they're going to get unlocked. I think if we look at banks for a second, because of the Basel capital standards, because of Dodd-Frank here in the United States, banks who were at one time very large lenders in the emerging world basically cannot be that active participant that they were 30 years ago in the emerging world. Capital standards make it to be quite expensive. The need for equity to back those type of those loans, unless they're fully collateralized, it makes it to be quite difficult. So capital standards has now starved capital in the emerging world. And at the same time, the emerging world was looking to investment firms like BlackRock to invest. And as a fiduciary, because everything we do is on behalf of clients, none of this is, all the money that we manage is not our money. It's other people's money, and we live under the fiduciary standard rule, and we have to really be mindful about what are the associated risks associated in investing in the emerging world. And there's just not enough capital today by the private sector to invest in the emerging world. It's a stark reality, and I think many people know it, but they're not talking about it. I had a long speech in Venice at the 2021 G20 meeting on the need to reimagine the role and responsibilities of the IMF and the World Bank. They are the primary lenders in the emerging world. And what we're witnessing right now is many emerging world failures, restructurings. Even in the last few weeks, we've read about 3 or 4 more emerging world countries going through another IMF restructuring. And so it's getting worse, not getting better. And what I have been suggesting that the owners of the IMF and the World Bank, basically the G20, have to recharter these organizations. So right now, these organizations are basically only permitted to be the senior lender. And then they look for the private sector to be the junior lenders, to be subordinated to the IMF. And because of the failure of Argentina, because of the other areas, there's just, the private money for subordination is just not there anymore. And, people don't want to talk about it, but I'm pretty loud about it. If we are going to decarbonize the emerging world, which means trillions of dollars of investments in the emerging world to truly decarbonize the emerging world. And as you framed it too, Carlos, the emerging world actually has more climate risks than many countries in the Northern Hemisphere. Equatorial part of the world is going to be the most impacted with climate change. The most severe risks are going to be in the equatorial part of the world, where most of the emerging countries are. And so we need to, as a world, come together and change the charter of the IMF and World Bank, because our charter hasn't been changed since Bretton Woods, and the world has changed so dramatically. And it is our view that the IMF and the World Bank should be providing the subordinated piece. And maybe the first loss comes from the country and they provide the second loss. If we had, almost like mortgage-backed securities, you have the borrower provide the round of equity, you have a housing agency providing a segment of first loss piece, second loss pieces, and then you create a capital structure. There'll be quite large pools of money for investing in that. And so I think this is an urgent need right now. As you framed it, it's getting worse, it's getting harder. The plight of many of the emerging countries are very difficult. And if we don't reimagine the role of the IMF and the World Bank, I don't believe there'll be enough capital. Now, that being said, there are some countries in the emerging world that are going to do fantastically well. For instance, I am very bullish on Mexico. Now, Mexico has growth issues, it has issues, but I believe its location next to the United States. I think North America with Canada, Mexico, and the United States, we are protected by two oceans. And then two, if you look at the incredible workforce of Mexico, its proximity to the United States, the ability to ship things via train, not by ships and being stuck at ports. Countries like Mexico are going to be a big beneficiary of this new trend of nearshoring. And then there's other countries like Vietnam, like Indonesia, are going to be pretty large destinations as we recalibrate our supply chains. So there are going to be some countries that are going to be beneficiaries, like China has been in the first 20 years of globalization, 30 years of globalization. But I think the Mexicos, the Vietnams, the Indonesias are going to be also large beneficiaries, including India. But but beyond that, it becomes more difficult. And so the issues around the emerging world is probably one of the more frightening things for me to worry about, because I just don't see where we are right now, the way governments are behaving, the lack of interconnectedness. I just don't see a solution yet, but to address climate risk in the emerging world properly.
I hope that you're wrong and that the capital is unlocked maybe through mechanisms like carbon pricing, a global carbon market, or voluntary carbon markets that are better organized, more structured. Because certainly we see in Mexico, very glad to hear what you just said about Mexico, and in other places where we're present, huge potential and projects that make a lot of sense. But it's really the availability of capital, the scarcity of capital, as you were saying.
We're investing in one project at a time in South America. We just did a big project with a major company in India, but it's project by project. We'll never get to the trillions of dollars of investing if we have to focus project by project by project. That's not going to move the dial.
I agree, and the responsibility lies with the developed world to make sure that the structures, like you're saying, exist to mobilize the capital towards the emerging world. And it's really about risk and how to mitigate the risk, the political risk and so on, that goes with investing in those countries. Now, before we close, Larry, you've been quite clear on Mexico. What's your view on Spain? What can we expect?
Spain is underappreciated by global investors. Let me start there. I think Spain has the opportunity to be the transformational country of Europe. You have sun, you have wind. So Spain is one of the leaders in solar and wind, but it has so much more potential. You are closer to North Africa for gas and other sources of energy. You have a pipeline from Algeria. You have a educated workforce. You have actually great international companies. And so I actually believe Spain is going to be one of the leaders in this transition, especially in the European transition. And I do believe Spain has an opportunity to really show its potential, but more important, to show its economic strength. And so I look at Spain with a lot of optimism relative to other places in Europe, but I also look to Spain as a driver, a global driver towards decarbonization. You have that opportunity to be that innovator as you have been, but you have an opportunity to be even more innovative. Spain obviously has been harmed by this drought and by record heat. Record heat means there's been a lot of sun. Utilize that energy from the sun. Because of the extra heat required, it whips up the wind more. Great opportunities in wind, but also it can be a leader in so many other areas within the decarbonization complex. And so I look to Spain with immense enthusiasm, and I'm glad I wasn't asked the question about a few other countries in Europe.
Very well. Thank you so much, Larry. You've been so generous with your time and really lovely conversation. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your leadership on all these topics. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and the action to decarbonize the world as fast as we can.
So, Carlos, thank you for what you're doing at BBVA. BBVA is making a difference in Mexico, in Spain, in all parts of it. And it's really fun to watch the success of BBVA and the opportunity ahead of you.
Thank you very much, Larry.